Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Remember those words of Dr. Martin Luther King? I used to imagine him saying that to the masses, standing somewhere in this great rally and giving out this speech. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And then I found out that it was a letter. That he wrote a letter. He wrote a letter because the stakes were high. The stakes were high in Birmingham, the stakes were high everywhere, and people considered Martin Luther King Jr. an outsider and told him that he had no right to assist with the oppression that was occurring around him. So, come with me. It's April 1963. Oh, I need that. Thank you. It's April 1963. The state was Alabama. Two organizations, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, came together and organized an anti-segregation campaign. The campaign included a number of things: a series of mass meetings, direct actions, lunch counter sit-ins, marches on City Hall, and a boycott of downtown merchants right in the middle of Easter season. During those mass meetings, King Jr. spoke to black and white citizens about the philosophy, his philosophy of nonviolence, and the importance for them to have their own dignity and to recognize oppression against themselves and to speak out against that and to act out against that. And he extended appeals for people to help him in this work. And so day after day, more and more people started to volunteer, and as they did, the lunch counter sit-ins became library sit-ins. And the marches on City Hall became marches at voter registration booths. And hundreds were arrested because people just didn't like that. And one of those people was Martin Luther King Jr. However, there were several white Southern clergymen who were upset not by the injustices that were being done against African American people, but about the fact that they were protesting those injustices. And so together, there were 8 of them, Protestant and Jewish, and they wrote 2 letters that appeared in the newspaper. The first one was called An Appeal for Law and Order and Common Sense, and the second was a letter that was addressed to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself. It said,
"We clergymen are among those who, in January, issued an appeal for law and order and common sense in dealing with racial problems in Alabama. However, we are now confronted by a series of demonstrations by some of our Negro citizens, directed and led in part by outsiders. We recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized. But we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely."
An ally smuggled the newspaper with that letter to Dr. King in his jail cell. The letter made 2 impressive statements. One, that oppressed people needed to just wait. And the second one was that outsiders should not be involved in actions that involve justice. It was that information that upset Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to such an extent that he decided to respond by writing a letter. But remember, he was in jail. There wasn't any paper that was readily available. And so he started to write in the margins of any little piece of paper that showed up or passed by or got smuggled into his jail cell. And then he saved them. He didn't put them under his mattress because they didn't allow him to have a mattress in that jail cell. And so he saved piece by piece by piece, little tiny parts of paper in the corner of his cell so that he could get them smuggled through his attorney to the outside world. How did he get enough paper? Well, people started to pass him little pieces, and his attorney started to put things into his shirt when he would go and visit him, and eventually he got enough pieces of paper that he was able to start to write. And so he did. And he wrote for 5 days, something that ended up, once it was typed up, equaled 21 pieces of typed paper. This gentleman was one of his attorneys, who now lives in San Francisco, Dr. Clarence Jones, and he explains how he got things through.
Have you seen this? And he pulled a copy of a full-page ad from the Birmingham Herald, the local newspaper, where a full-page ad had been run and signed by the principal clergyman. I think there may have been a rabbi who signed it also. This full-page ad had been addressed to him. Said, Dr. King, you're an agitator, you're an outside agitator. You need to get out of town. We have problems here in Birmingham, but we don't, we're working them out. We don't need you to tell us. These things take time, blah, 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 blah. And Martin was just, he was just steaming with this. He says, when you go back out, take these. So I said, what is this? And what he had done, what he had taken the blank spaces of the newspapers and paper towels, anything that was a blank space, he had started to write a response to the full-page ad. The process was, I could visit him twice a day, and they knew who I was, the jailers. Amazing. They just had to take my things out in a while, but nobody patted me down, So inside, I went into the jail, and inside my shirt, I put a blank white piece of paper, a yellow piece of paper. And when I got inside, I would give Martin the blank piece of paper, and he would continue writing what ultimately became the letter from the Birmingham jail. This happened twice a day for 5 days until a Friday, when I got a call from Harry Belafonte because I was being besieged by the parents who wanted to know about getting the bail money for the letter. I didn't pay any attention to the letter.
You didn't think it was a big deal.
No, I didn't.
You took it. Your instructions were to take it back to Y.T. Walker.
Y.T. Walker, and have him type it up. I never even looked at it. Okay.
That was the beginning of what was called the letter from the Birmingham jail. It was written to give argument as to why oppressed people should not have to wait. And it was also written to clergy and then eventually to the outside world, including us, to show us that when injustice is present, allies cannot and should not ever be outsiders. I can almost hear Martin Luther King reading his letter.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling out present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. But since I feel that you are men of good, well, men of genuine goodwill, and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should give the reason for my being in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the argument of outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliate organizations all across the South. Several months ago, our local affiliate here in Birmingham invited us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program, if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promises. So I am here along with several members of my staff because I have basic organizational ties here. Beyond this, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to practically every hamlet and city of the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown.
So he humbly but clearly explains that he was actually the president of the SCLC, which had chapters in Birmingham and many other cities across the United States. But he begins by teaching these clergy, and now us, about the importance of being a responsive ally. He says, I am here because injustice is here. It was as clear as that. I am here because injustice is here. What are the outworkings of that lesson for us? Can we recognize what is unjust in this world, and can we see it and not avoid it? Martin Luther King said,
Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outsider agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere in this country.
so can we rework that old idea that if anyone is experiencing difficulty, they just need to be positive? And we just need to hold them in positivity and that it'll all just go away? Can we recognize that injustice somewhere, somehow, with someone, if that happens, we are with the injustice? If there is injustice somewhere, somehow, with someone, we are with the injustice. We don't close our eyes, we don't ignore it, we don't walk away. And it's not being a retrospective ally, I like calling it that, the ally who is an ally for battles that were already fought. That doesn't count. It's the everyday challenges of the now. There's something that is called far-sighted allyship. Farsightedness, those who are farsighted. Farsightedness is a condition in which you can see objects in the distance very clearly, but objects nearby are kind of blurry. Well, Martin Luther King Jr. was saying that we should not misunderstand that for people who are suffering oppression in any form, the issue of oppression is not blurry. It's doggone clear for them. But social justice, farsightedness, is a thing. We can be an ally when it comes to big issues, war, poverty, things that are going on in other countries, but we can blur, we can miss some of the nuances, some of the microaggressions, some of the inappropriate comments. Oh, your wife is a woman? I thought that was a man. We can blur those and not recognize the injustice that is done there. Remember, when you're an ally for someone who is not like you. You're a buddy for somebody who's just like you. But when you have the courage to be an ally, there is something about that person that is not like you that you stand up for. For someone who is an ally, it's a difference between performative and substantive allyship. It's not about signing a petition. It's not about being angry over the injustice that has been done to someone. It's about doing the work to understand the systems, the challenges that have created the oppression in the first place. It's knowing why you signed. It's knowing the depth of the basis of your anger and the experience of someone who is not like you. It's discovering the underlying power of systemic dynamics, and it's knowing your own dominant identity and how that dominant identity can wield power and how you can use that for justice. It's asking yourself, how do I take up space with my dominant identity? And how can I model what allyship looks like? An ally asks, how do these unjust situations that do not impact me personally impact me personally? Martin Luther King said,
We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntary. It is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action movement that was well-timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards the goal of political independence. And we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and draw down and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see the tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out, nagging signs reading white men and colored. When your first name becomes nigger and your middle name becomes boy, however old you are. And your last name becomes John. And when your wife and mother are never given the respected title of Mrs. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience.
Did you hear their experience? I had a hard time even deciding to have Martin Luther King Jr. read that part. But an ally needs to understand. The onus is on the ally to reflect, to have an active way of life that commits to equality and equity and opportunities and inclusion for everyone, especially marginalized communities. Too often, marginalized communities are forced to be in conversations and actions that work for the dominant community, when it's the dominant community that chooses the conversations and has the say. The role of the ally is to step back and to listen to the voices of those who are not in the dominant position. And if they aren't present, to bring those voices in as though they are. In his letter, King Jr. recognized injustice before many of the people of his time, including those 8 clergy who were content with seeing things as the norm, and some people of color who were afraid to speak out or who got used to it being the norm.
He said, of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. I started thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of 2 opposing forces in the Negro community. One is a force of a complacency made up of Negroes who, as a result of long years of oppression, have been so completely drained of self-respect and a sense of somebodyness that they have adjusted to segregation. And a few Negroes in the middle class who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and at points they profit from segregation, have unconsciously become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and comes perilously close to advocating violence. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The urge for freedom will eventually come. This is what happened to the American Negro. Something within him has reminded him of his birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded him that he can gain it. Consciously and unconsciously, he has been swept in by what the Germans call the zeitgeist. And with his black brothers of Africa and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean, he is moving with a sense of cosmic urgency toward the promised land of racial justice. I have heard numerous religious leaders of the South call upon their worshipers to comply with a desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers say, follow this decree because integration is morally right and the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churches stand on the sideline and merely mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. Oh, sanctimonious trivialities. So here we are moving toward the exit of the 20th century with a religious community largely adjusted to the status quo, standing as a taillight between other community agencies rather than a headlight, leading men to higher levels of justice. I have traveled the length and breadth of Alabama, Mississippi, and all the other southern states. On sweltering southern summer days and crisp autumn mornings, I have looked at her beautiful churches with their lofty spires pointing heavenward. I have beheld the impressive outlay of her massive religious education buildings. Over and over again, I have found myself asking what kind of people worship here. Who is their God? Where were they? Where were their voices of support when tired, bruised, and weary Negro men and women decided to rise from the dark dungeons of complacency to the bright hills of creative protest?
What kind of people worship here? What kind of people are in community here? I remember last week hearing about strength. I have the strength to accomplish all that is mine to do. Being an ally is ours to do. And it's interesting, as we discussed and claimed the powers last week, I was able to connect every single power to allyship in one way or another. It just is ours to do. We can't be outsiders. We have the joy, the strength, the courage, the wisdom, the zeal, the faith, the love, the righteously held power, the imagination, the understanding, the life, the faith, the love, the order to release ourselves from the constricting lens of an outsider to the powerful understanding of an ally. So called, so be it. King concludes by saying,
I hope this letter finds you strong in faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as an integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities. And in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all of their scintillating beauty. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, M.L. King Jr.
so this one letter has penetrated all around the world and within every one of us. It's our work to do. Let's say our affirmation. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I am an ally. I claim allyship for peace, equity, and justice. Amen.